All right, at this time I'd like to welcome in my guest, Pam Heggie, to the show. Pam, welcome.
Thank you.
It's good to have you. Um, just a little bit about Pam and I's connection. We did kind of grow up, I was going to say in the same town, but not really the same town, same area. And her oldest brother, Kimball, and I are, well, he's one of my closest friends, and her brother Boyd, who we will talk about later, was another one of my good friends. But a few weeks ago, Pam had written a post on Facebook that I really appreciated. She's an advocate for mental health and for therapy, so that's always good when you find somebody like that. You want to harness that and get them on the show and have them talk about things because they're they're willing to talk. So that's a good thing. So anyway, one of the things that kind of stood out too in her post on social media was that she is being open about her therapy story and kind of what brought her to therapy and kind of some of the things that she's uh, working on in her process. And like I said, I just kind of wanted to get that because I know that there's some things that she can share that will be helpful to others. And I know she's been working hard on working on things, so that's really good to see too. So Pam, without further ado, if you could kind of just give the audience a little bit of background and kind of share your, I guess, just share your story. That's kind of your, I guess, your therapy story and kind of where
Sure.
you're at.
Okay. I'm not nervous at all.
Okay.
All right. I'll just convince myself. So, yeah, my story is, and it's funny because I kind of refer to it as trauma now. I just have a lot of grief in my background, and it's one thing I've learned now is that was trauma, and that actually was like one of the first things. Identifying my grief as actual trauma was one of the first like aha moments. So I guess my trauma story is almost the way I look at it now. um, in 2007, when I was 7 months pregnant with our first son, and I was 24, my brother Boyd, my second oldest brother, you mentioned, he was 30, and he went into sudden cardiac arrest and passed away later that day. So that was sudden. Took the whole family by storm to Canada. 2 months later, had our first baby, and so that was the first, I guess, introduction with grief for me. And then in 2013, so about 6 years later, um, it was my fourth pregnancy. I'd had two more boys. So my fourth pregnancy, at 24 weeks and 5 days, I had them very prematurely, and they both passed away. The first one, Shepherd, at 3 days old, and then, sorry, Deacon was first at 3 days old, and then Shepherd was 6 days old. So that definitely, at this point, we had just moved back home to Cardston. We were living in a house that had cement floors and studs. We had no walls, no kitchen, no bedrooms.
Sounds
So
comforting.
yeah. So that happened. That was in the span of a week, and we came home back basically to like completely upside down life. And then, so that about 6 years following, exactly, I feel like it's kind of a 6 year curse at this point, is when my dad was diagnosed with terminal cancer. So he lived 11 months and passed away in, basically, he was diagnosed in 2018, passed away just before the end of 2018. So yeah, I made it, honestly, a little shockingly, to that year. It was 2019, in the wake of my dad passing, that I finally got therapy and realized, why wouldn't I get help? If there was something that could be helpful, why wouldn't I go give that a try?
Right. So why do you think, what do you think that, I mean, just kind of maybe growing up, I know we kind of grew up in the same area, just maybe with that mindset of just, you got to tough it out and do it yourself. I mean, or what was kind of blocking you from that, do you think?
So it's interesting how different, so Boyd, for starters, I don't think we were even aware. I know we weren't. No one in my whole family was even aware of how like actually wounded we all were, and how it was already starting to affect our relationships with each other and our relationships with everyone around us, really. And because yes, that's exactly what you do. You just keep going. It's like, they're in a better place, like they're happier, so let's all just be happy. And and that's kind of what you pretend to do, because it kind of works, and you don't really know what else to do. There's no book that tells you how to grieve a loved one and how to properly do it so that you stay mentally healthy, right?
Yeah.
Maybe there's a book. I didn't.
I mean, there's books, but yeah, I mean, I think even when the books they say like everybody grieves differently, so there's always I think sometimes that's like another classic science, like, well, everybody's different, everybody's, whatever, which is true, but
Yes, yeah,
obviously there's still a process that you have to go through and still kind
right.
of like even if it's just like the five stages of grief, you still have to be I guess maybe being aware of like where am I in this and kind of how is that affecting me? And like you said, so just curious, like when you talk about like, you know, kind of being aware of the wounding, even with Boyd's passing and like, how did you see that? Maybe even looking back, like how was that impacting, I guess, you kind of like the family and stuff like that?
So looking back, we like even just the logistics of a loved one passing, like trying to figure out an estate and planning a funeral, and then even attempting like your first get together as a family without him, and like dinners and just the logistics of how does your family keep being a family.
Hmm.
So we weren't aware of, like, I really just wish we'd been able to get therapy as a family, honestly, but like that's just not, it isn't the culture, right? Like it just
Yeah.
isn't. And
Right.
and so I think a lot of our own pain got projected on each other for
Mm.
and we're a very honest and open family too. We're very straightforward. We talk about our feelings. We don't hold back. So I think in a sense, maybe like at least there's that was probably healthy to get some things out. But then, yeah, that's kind of what you do when you're hurting. Sometimes you just kind of fling that hurt.
Yeah. Well, and I
So,
think the other thing too is just even understanding the idea of complex grief,
mhm,
because it's complex when, especially from a parent standpoint, when a
right,
young child dies before their time or whatever, even though, I mean, Boyd was 30, not, I mean,
right,
he's young, but
mhm,
like, just the idea of that happening too. I mean, even from a parental standpoint, that throws you into a funk. And then, losing a sibling at a young age too is
right.
definitely difficult. So, I mean, it's just, yeah, all those parameters and stuff, it really, I guess until you're in it, you don't really realize, yeah, what the impact is going to be. So
And
it's
you're
a,
living your life separate for the most
Mhm.
part, and then when you get together, it's like, oh yeah, he's
Yeah,
not, and then it's like, oh yeah, I'm really sad about that. But you can almost put it on a shelf when
right.
you're away from each other. So then it like tests you twice as hard because you don't deal with it so much when you're away. And then you all come together and it's like all of a sudden right in your face that he's not there.
Yeah. Yeah.
So yeah.
Yeah, it's big. It's big. Okay. So kind of as in, then maybe just
Yeah.
starting to get through that and then now
Right.
having
Basically, yeah. That led
having
into the twins.
Mhm.
So with the twins, what was interesting about them is since I mentioned like we had just moved to this unfinished house, and since like it's Canada, I had maternity leave, so I had 12 weeks leave from work, and then they actually let me go on sick leave. So I ended up getting about 10 months leave, and Derek didn't have a job yet. He was just subbing as a teacher. He was graduated but wasn't hired. So
Derek is
interest,
her husband.
yeah,
Yeah.
sorry.
Just in case
School
anybody didn't,
teacher.
right.
Yeah. So interestingly enough, like neither of us had jobs, and
Mhm.
it was okay because we actually didn't. The bank didn't let us buy the house because it wasn't finished. It sounds insane when I look back, but we didn't own the house, and so we didn't even actually have the mortgage because of it, and we had rented out our other house. So just the finances and the job perspective, life worked out that we could basically just barely cover the bills and just stay home and be with each other and just grieve and just be a family. We didn't have to like, I say it now, we didn't have to like go out into the world and operate machinery. Like we got to just be us, and we didn't have to like navigate any other relationships with like coworkers, people, family. Like it was just me and him. And our kids were ages like 5, 3, and 1, our boys, almost 2, 4, and 6. So we only had one in kindergarten at the time and half day. Like it was such a simple, easy existence. We didn't go to church. We didn't get the mail. We didn't, we really gave ourselves the permission to just be sad and grieve. And we talked and talked and talked. He mostly listened. I mostly talked. But it's funny because I almost feel like I processed everything for us. Like he listened to it, and that was like what he needed because we didn't know how. Like we definitely probably both should have been in therapy, but we figured it out. We had about 4 to 5 straight months of that with just each other. And
Right.
so I think that's what hit me so hard after my dad, because my kids were like, here we are like 5, 6 years later, we're established. He's working, I'm working. You don't go on sick leave. Like I actually, now that I think about it, I probably could have, but it doesn't cross your mind. Like with the twins, I'd had a baby. So I was on maternity leave already. Like it had made sense with that pregnancy. But so I'm working full time. I have like more than one job, and he's working full time, and the kids are in things, and here we are like operating machinery when we
Yeah.
should be, is basically what it felt like. And
Right.
that was just a recipe for disaster, and life was just, there was triggers everywhere. I was like so high, and then I'd go so low, and I didn't feel like I was in control of anything other than like my job and those few things that I could like easily mark my progress with. So I threw myself into these coping strategies that was, they were helping me function, and I was functioning, but it wasn't fun. I
Hmm.
didn't feel like I just felt very out of control. I felt like there was triggers everywhere, and it would just send me so low for days. So yeah, I needed help.
Yeah, right, right. So one of the things that you said in there too, and maybe even this is kind of where like I mean, you talked about the notion of like having that time and using that time to talk through and stuff. I was thinking back even like when you talked about Boyd passing away, and even in kind of normal life, that's probably our biggest challenge is like giving ourselves space or holding that space for time to grieve rather than just kind of moving through life and just kind of letting life be our whatever healing process, which doesn't really work. It's because you do have to kind of hold space for that and be able to allow yourself to talk through it or whatever it might be. So then, but even with that, like you said, even with that time, now you kind of like emerge into the real world, and now here's all this other stuff, right? These triggers and things that still are going to come or be a part of it, even though you've given yourself that time to, grieve and talk through it and really express yourself. I mean, how did you respond to triggers at that point prior to therapy? Was it just like you said, just the high emotions, the lows, all that kind of stuff? It just sort of took you from one end of the spectrum to the other, and that was kind of it, or what was the?
Well, I always say that grief takes your like your weaknesses, your in not your in well your insecurities for sure too, but it takes like for me, I can get like very fired up, and so it takes your weaknesses and it lights them on fire and like times them by about 100. So like if you have a little bit of a temper, say, right, like then
Yeah.
you're gonna rage. If you're the type of person that feels sad easily, you're going to be like 10 times that feeling of sadness will overwhelm. Like for me, it lit that fierceness in me on
Mhm.
fire. And I would, in a sense, rage. It wasn't necessarily like a temper rage, but I would feel like my brain was burning
Mhm.
sometimes, how I would try to physically describe it. And I would feel like it would eat me alive night long. I would lay awake, and my brain, because it's the middle of the night, right? And you're kind of slipping in and out of that like state where you're almost losing control of what you do know to be true still.
Yeah.
And that the vulnerability sort of takes over, and my brain would just, it would just yell at me like, everything you're worried about is true. Like, they really don't like you and that type of thing. And they do think you're way too like fierce and like these vulnerabilities then become these things you're also self-conscious of. It's like,
Right.
can everybody see? Do they think I'm like a spaz now? Like for that was my personal battle.
Right. Yeah.
So I would tear
No.
myself down.
Right.
Yeah.
So, and obviously at this point, you haven't done anything. Are you thinking at this point, like, hey, I maybe could get some help, or is that still like that's
Yeah.
something over here
You know
that's
what?
like,
I thought about wanting to do therapy for probably 6 months before I actually did it
uh,
because just the process. It's just so unfortunate that when you need therapy, it's when you're unstable, it's when you're overwhelmed and you're not coping well and you feel like you can't function. And so it's like, how am I supposed to choose the right therapist when and go out in the world and find, and then it's expensive. Like the the insurance just doesn't even cover the whole cost. And
yeah,
so it's a tough thing to navigate and get from wanting therapy to having a therapist is
right.
it's hard. It took me some time.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, a couple sessions ago, I had Theo Fleury on as a guest, and that was one thing he said about in Canada. He said he feels like the therapists have kind of priced themselves out of the market, and it's really hard to even afford it, for people and stuff. So that's sad to hear that it makes it even more of a challenge to not be able to
Right.
get the help when you need it based on an expense thing versus like a need, or a desire to want it. So, yeah.
But definitely part of the healthcare system. It's just as important.
Right, right, right. Okay, so now we're kind of moving through, and you're getting to the point. So now, you not necessarily that. I mean, loss or death is ever fully behind us, but as you're starting to work through it, and now coming upon dad gets diagnosed with cancer. So now, it timeline wise, sort of take us through that part then.
So what's interesting is I'd actually started to feel like life was getting. I remember thinking like, oh, this is how, because I had two more children after the twins, and
Uh,
so your first baby after loss is called your rainbow baby, and he just oozed rainbows and sunshine and everything that's good. So
well, that's good.
that was a lot of there was a lot of healing with that,
Hmm.
and I actually had him a year after the twins, so that for me was good to be able to have him so soon. And then we had a little girl finally. The rest were boys. And then yeah, so those there was kind of about a year after the rainbow baby. So I would say full 2 years from when we lost the twins was a lot of struggle, and especially that year, the first year was just a lot of darkness. And then we had about 2.5 years of like things were feeling normal, relationships for us were feeling healthy and good with like more than just ourselves. And that's another thing. Luckily, me and Derek we've just always had a solid marriage, and so that's just thankfully not been the struggle. And so that's definitely was a huge difference for us. But
Yeah, because a lot of these things can tear couples apart for sure,
right.
right? Yeah.
And that's another thing. Like, I just think being home together, like, there was no way for him to go to work or be in a different setting and grieve differently because we were together. And so we sort of had to grieve the same since we spent so much time, and he was renovating the house and we were working that way, and that was we just did it together, and so it bonded us instead of figuring out this path on our own, which I
Yeah.
know you can do, but it definitely, if you can bond over it, that's a silver lining.
Oh yeah, for sure. Yeah.
Yeah, so I don't remember what point I was at. Oh, there was a good couple of years, and then yeah, from the thing with cancer too, the diagnosis is its own event because it feels like they're already passed away. Like they're like a terminal is like a sentence, right? It just feels like looming.
Yeah.
So there was about 11 months, and that's just like you know it the only thing about cancer is at the end of it you're actually relieved because nobody should have to live like that. So when he passed away, it was like there was this like brief sense of finally he's not suffering, and then just like a solid year of just yeah, it was me coping when I look back now, just trying to drown myself in being busy and accomplishing in other areas because there was nothing. Like, you can't control it. You lose all control that you thought you had and that we'd worked so hard to build after the twins. It just felt like that it was too much.
Right,
Yeah.
right. Well, and I don't know if you want to touch on this a little bit, but too, I mean, obviously, um, it's probably hard to convey a sense of like the who your dad was to you and kind of
Right.
what he meant. And just obviously people that are listening that know Freddie, obviously maybe could put that together a little bit more so. But can you put that into words at all just for people?
Yeah, well, and for me too, like it's different. Luckily, thankfully, we had moved back to Cardston, and
Mhm.
so he lives just 5 minutes down the road. And um, you're really testing me.
I know, I know. I'm feeling it too though, because again, this part's a little bit close to home for me as well. So
So he's just one of those guys that involves himself in the community, and he worked in the community. He was a contractor, so between how much he served with the church and volunteered his time, especially his skills construction wise, like just logistically speaking, he's everywhere all over the town. Like everywhere you look, there's something he built or worked on or donated or just, and people that he served with, or and then he served on the county for 8 years. Don't ask me why he loved that so much. Community politics sounds a little painful to me, but
right.
yeah, he just loved it. He loved serving his community, and he just like got so much satisfaction out of those types of things. And yeah, he drove by my house multiple times a day. I knew exactly what his truck sounded like when he was pulling in. And because we were so close and handy and easy, convenient, he did grow close with my boys. So yeah, he sort of had become like our person. I feel like sometimes, like everyone loves everyone. The whole like my mom, everybody, all the aunts, uncles, everyone loves each other the same. But when you get lucky enough to have someone in your life more, just logistically speaking, from where you live, it's just a special kind of bond that man sucks not to have. And there's just this
Yeah.
void. Like
Yeah.
with Boyd, I remember thinking, like, when I went back to Pittsburgh, it was so crazy because it was like he never existed there. And so it was almost, in a sense,
Hmm.
like you could just fake it and pretend some days that like nothing had changed, and you wouldn't nobody was going to see you. You could go to the grocery store, it didn't matter if you nobody was going to look at you and know exactly what just happened in your life, and like, how's she doing? And that was really hard for me after the twins too, to be going through this like traumatic tragedy, and to have every single person in your life around and kind of almost you're kind of living their worst nightmare, right? It's everyone's worst
Yeah.
nightmare to have something like that happen. And so they want to know how you're doing, and it's very like it's okay. And that's the with my dad, like there's no escaping. It's good and it's bad,
Yeah.
but
Yeah.
yeah,
Like you
like
said, lots of reminders slash if they could be triggers or whatever, but lots
yeah,
of stuff to. But I mean, I guess in a healing way, there can also be a sense of like legacy
right,
and turning that into a positive as well too, to where it's like he was obviously a really good person and like you said, served the community well. So there's a lot to be
yeah,
appreciative of from that standpoint too. So
yeah.
yeah. Okay, so something I think I heard you say, not now, but maybe it was something you read or something you wrote, that though was kind of the tipping point for you though, right? Your
Right.
dad passing, that was sort of the tipping point and kind of, right? Is that
Without a doubt. Yep. It just, I actually feel like, and I've always been a little bit like, yeah, with the twins, I really feel like it was kind of a miracle to figure that out how we did, and to have made past that. And we always, like, now that I've learned a lot of things too, it's almost like amazing. Like I look back and we did things that I think like therapists would even have recommended at the time. Like we always just naturally acknowledged their existence and talked about them all the time. And we celebrated the day they were born. We just like um, one thing that we did is I always wanted to frame the pictures of us holding them basically while they were passing away, when they removed the tubes.
Mhm.
the breathing tubes, and it's like, Pam, why do you want to put up these terribly hurtful pictures in on the walls of your home? Like, are you crazy? And I doubted it for probably a good couple of years. Well, no, I doubted sharing it. I put them up after about a year. And then I was almost, I wasn't ashamed, but I was almost afraid of people seeing that these pictures were up.
Right.
And
Kind of their judgment, maybe.
right, that's just
Yeah.
not normal. It's not what you do. You usually don't take your saddest, most devastating moment of your life and frame it on your wall.
Right.
And and I'm not even sure I understood it, but looking back, we really had a lot of I'm very I've been very good at giving myself permission to feel whatever I needed to feel, even just with not going to church. Like
Mhm.
that's overwhelming for a lot of people in the midst of grief, but they couldn't give themselves that permission to just
Right.
stay home for a bit.
Hmm.
And it was hard. Like, I was surprised. There was definitely a little bit of backlash. But for me, it was what I needed. And I was good at giving myself that permission. And that gave Derek the permission and the whole family. And and looking back, I think framing those pictures, it's helped. I don't even know what they call it, but it's that desensitizing the trauma, right? Like,
Yeah.
looking at it over and over, and now it's just, oh, look, that's the pictures that we have of our two sons. They're the only pictures we have. So now it's just great to have pictures on the wall of them, and they're not near as hard to look at, and if anything, they're loving for me. That's kind of became my thing, that those pictures were actually full of love. And so that's what I see when I look at them now, and that's what the family sees, and that was a lot of very big healing thing for us. So
Well, I think too, I've done a podcast on this before about grief, and I think one of the things that I talk about in that, there's a book called Finding Meaning, and it's the subtitle is The Sixth Stage of Grief. And I think for me, that's what that looks like to
right,
me, is just more about the meaning part. Yes, it's some desensitization, but it's also just finding meaning in the loss, to where there's that significance of like, okay, this is for us. I mean, it is a part of our story. It's a part of our family. It's something that we, good, bad, or indifferent. I mean, it's something that is, it's a part of us. And so we want to see that in a more, like you said, positive light, and try to have it be something that can be more sustaining for us, rather than devastating or bringing us down or whatever type of thing. So it's turning that into that, versus just letting it be this constant kind of pull down, I guess, right?
I think it's amazing that with the right amount of mental work, and like you said at the beginning, she's been doing a lot of work. I'm like, that's exactly what it feels like. It's not therapy is a good time. It's not
Right.
perfect time. Call Ryan. It's therapy is
Well, you'll have a good time too, but yeah.
this is true. Yeah, it's hard. It's like, if anything, and I was kind of making just like a few notes, and yeah, like it's you it's not like to learn how to stop feeling emotions or being so emotional. If anything, it's just let's start to see clear. That's what I feel like for me. Let's feel different emotions and move on from those emotions, and start processing and moving somewhere, instead of staying stuck, which is definitely what I would say I felt like it was with my dad. And I didn't have these natural instincts to what to do. I felt like a fish out of water, honest. Like, it was so different from the twins. Like, it's like, yeah, grief is not grief even to the same person. Like, it was losing a different person at a different age with a different relationship, and you can't even like compare the two, honestly. Like, it's just insane how
Right.
differently it hurt and affected my life and my relationships and my abilities to just like remain at like an even keel. So right, so that's been huge for me.
Yeah.
It was just that main feeling, basically, of just no self-control over my evenness, like how to be able to stay peaceful. There, I didn't have control over my own peace at all.
Right.
So
Well, I think that's interesting, just kind of what you said too. So, I mean, for you, okay, so I've lost a sibling, I've lost children, and then now a parent. So it's like, if if you want have any insight or understanding, call Pam, right? Because it's like you've
yeah,
got the gamut on all. But I think that's a good point, as far as like just the like where that person fits into your life, the relationship, the dynamic, that those are all factors in, as far as like how the grief sits for you, what it means. I mean, especially from a parent standpoint, like how much of a foundation were they, how much of a support were they, and then to lose that, what that then now means to you. And like you said, where do you pick up the pieces, or how do you see yourself moving through that when maybe that was somebody you used to go to for counsel or advice or whatever it is. Now that's gone. So just a lot of different things.
Well, for me, it was one thing I did know was that like at least like a year would do a lot for me, that type of
Mhm.
thing. 2 years would do a lot. Like I do know that I don't know, I just sometimes think that's the way life is set up. It's like the time, it doesn't heal, but it makes it bearable, it makes it doable. It helps you get back to being able to function more normally, and
Yeah.
it's not so overwhelming. So I knew that was going to help, but I don't think, and I see now that because I didn't just grieve and feel the sadness and do nothing else but just grieve like I did with the twins, I realized I was coping, and it was keeping me in this holding pattern of not moving past the grief. And so it's almost like a year hasn't, like it's been a year and a half now, and I would say like it still feels like a couple of weeks, just in the sense of my brain still feels like it's on fire most days, like.
Mm.
And until you can start addressing, it's not even so much the actual like void of him being gone, it's the state that my emotions and that my like ability to function is in now. And that's what I'm that's what I want back.
Right.
I want to somehow be able to just to navigate the relationships that light my brain on fire so that I can just sleep again, type thing. So it's not even just like the actual void. Like there's that sadness, and then
Mhm.
there's ability to function. And so, and I don't know, they probably are just super tied together, but I'm that type of person. I just want to like, I can't quit my jobs. So how
Right.
do you
Right.
figure out how to grieve in the middle of like a busy, high functioning like life, I guess. That's what I'm learning.
Yeah. Right. Right. Because, and I think that goes back to what I said before. It's like, how do we hold space for that or find space for it in the midst of just I mean,
Yeah.
raising a family, working, all the different things that are kind of pulling at us. How do we make space for that? It definitely can become a challenge. But then, and we'll kind of maybe jump into this or shift into this too, is just that, and you're doing that or trying to do that, and then maybe avoid other negative patterns that have kind of besought you or attached themselves to you as a result of trauma.
Yeah.
So now, like another thing that you mentioned, and maybe I don't know if this is a good time to go into the post that you made about the being like the trauma was obvious, right? That you knew that there was issues with trauma,
Yeah.
but the fight or flight mode that you were
Yeah.
in and how long you'd been in it and stuff, you said that that wasn't as obvious, and the awareness of that. So that's the other thing too, is we're kind of going along. Yeah, time can heal, but we also have to be, conscious and aware of the patterns that we're in and the things that maybe how those patterns can be destructive. So I don't know if you can talk a little bit about your fight or flight or kind of what that meant for you.
Yeah. Um, Someone just walked in. It might be my mom. She can make an appearance on the.
Oh,
It is. Oh, it's Leah. Sorry, it's just my sister.
hi.
Um,
Another guest.
right. Yes. Yes, on the podcast. So she really, I actually haven't even, that was, that she's probably one of, they finally started therapy. So I should give her that credit.
Oh, nice, nice.
She definitely, yeah, my, um, the fight is, yes, fire, you're burning. It feels like it's burning. And you kind of light things on fire. That's what I felt like I was doing. I was going around lighting other relationships there. And like I'm like kind of first part of your question, I'm like moment Leah made me forget what relation like were you.
I guess, sorry, we're breaking up just a little bit, but I think one of the things I was saying about the fight or flight was just like you kind of noticed, I mean, your trauma part was very obvious,
Yeah.
but then the fight or flight was more like you weren't aware of necessarily that pattern in your life. And so just kind of, what helped you to be aware of that, and then what did that look like as you maybe look back on like that and kind of the
So
things
I
that,
was basically self-destruct. So the I would feel like on fire, feel like I would just let myself burn. I would just true like you are just, and the vulnerabilities really have been there, and I'll get there because I know you want to talk about it. I found them. I got to the bottom of them. I feel like through EMDR, and which is why I finally tried it as well, because I didn't start out with that, but I wanted to get to the bottom of why did I knew that the things people thought or misunderstood about me true, but would just completely unravel me. And it's like, what does this do with grief and my dad and sadness? Like, my so mad that somebody like wrong perceptions about me. And why is that ruining my like peace and taking over my life? And it's probably someone that doesn't even, and right there it's because in the switch that I've had to like really accept, and that's definitely been like my journey. I would say this summer is figuring out where the patterns were starting to make me self-destruct. I was hating and waiting before, beating up, and it just was completely like drowning me and overwhelming me, and no chance at the relationships that had kind of maybe been possible, and they made me feel basically like a pup, and they being triggered couldn't like or think about just feeling like I was were possibly true, and maybe I just didn't like see it. So yeah, self-destruction, these
okay.
patterns of self-destruction, big time. Yeah, the therapies helped me realize the triggers, and so with the ER, we kind of got them. For me was that that's my vulnerability is that I'm a hard personality to love, and that not that I'm not worthy of love, but that I'm just like the abrasive overconfidence, which is a trait that you're familiar with, probably. But just kind of like as a even as a woman who's not afraid to talk about her feelings on the internet, like that, some people, and that became this trigger that people didn't love us, that people thought I was too, wanted me to have less feelings and stop having any feelings. It
Um,
was kind of it was weird.
yeah.
I really,
Can I pause you for just for one sec?
yeah.
All right. So if there was some confusion there, I think one of the things Pam was just talking about was just her pattern of self-destruction. And from, and she mentioned the EMDR and doing that, and that's something that I just recently was trained in. And so one of the things that I was curious about that, and she kind of mentioned this, is that in EMDR, you kind of have this notion of categorizing I guess the outcome of your trauma and kind of what that puts you into. And so there's like the responsibility defectiveness category where you can kind of feel this sense of not feeling good enough. Then there's like safety and vulnerability where I don't feel safe. So therefore, maybe I put these guards up or I kind of protect myself in certain ways. Or like a power and control dynamic where maybe at times we feel powerless or we don't feel like we have power in our lives. And so I think you were saying like yours was more in that vulnerability area where it was like I just was kind of, is that what you?
Yeah, I was just basically at the mercy of my like my own vulnerabilities. And my sister always says like you can't heal what you can't name.
Right.
And until you can start to see, well, why am I self-destructing that way? Then you stop beating yourself up for self-destructing, and you realize, oh, it's because I've like that's definitely what the EMDR like it like woke me up to the things that, yeah, that does make sense. As a child, I actually did kind of feel a little bit that way, but and it's nothing about like going back to your childhood and like laying blame anywhere. It's just realizing that like as humans, everybody has different experiences, and those experiences kind of leave you equipped or unequipped in different ways. And so learning, maybe like just becoming, learning what to refer to them and just to see them, just to know they exist just a little bit. And it's like it's self-reflection and it's self-awareness, but in like a beautiful way that gives you back the control that you've lost.
Right. Well, and I think it's important, like you just said, because even in some of the EMDR books I've been reading, I mean, one of the things it says is that even in the most supportive families, trauma can occur, and it has nothing to do with even sometimes the families or what they're doing or not doing. It's just the realization that as young people, children, whatever, we're processing these memories in our own way. And
Mm-hmm.
sometimes the memories get processed in a maladaptive way, which then leads to further problems or dysfunction or whatever it might be.
Yeah.
So it doesn't, like you said, it's not always a laying blame thing. It's more about understanding and trying to just figure things out from whether it's like, hey, where I fit into the family, if I'm the youngest, if I'm the oldest, I'm whatever, and different things like that.
Impossible to not to
Right.
escape unscathed without something, like especially in a big family, but I'm sure small families too. Any families at all, you're going to learn things. You're going to pick up things that, and maybe I often think like, what would I be like without the trauma? And this was huge too. Like I would start to feel like if nobody had passed away, like would would I make a better first impression? Like would I not seem as jaded as I sometimes am? And so yeah, you can beat yourself up those ways, and you start to wonder. And if you don't realize how the things are affecting you, then you'll just. I always feel like there's the trauma, there's the initial trauma, and then there's the emotional stuff that you're left with, the aftermath. And if you don't figure out how to, I have felt like if I don't get control of it, then the loss was going to take a lot more from me. It was going to take other relationships, and it's like they might as well have passed away too, because if they're not a part of your life, because you don't know how to like keep healthy relationships now, then what else? Like basically you lost that too. So it's more, there's that initial loss, and then there's what else can you try to keep from losing moving
Right,
forward.
right. Or if you're in this vulnerability dynamic where it's hard to be vulnerable or whatever it might be, you may not be willing to even put yourself out there in a way to have the relationship be saved, right?
Right.
Because it's like
Yep.
I'm just going to protect myself, or I'm just
Which
going
is
to hide.
probably more common. Yeah.
Right, right.
if you're
So,
not if you're not kind of willing, and it's too bad, like sometimes I think people feel just downright insulted if you suggest therapy,
right,
and it's just so unfortunate, because it's like, it's for me, it's like talking is my love language. It's how I show love, wanting to talk, and letting, and someone like listening to me talk, that's like the best thing ever, because and you're going to give me feedback. Like it's almost like it's a privilege is how
right.
I see it. And so it is unfortunate that it has to be seen as, I think a lot of people see like working on themselves in therapy as meaning that they're at fault. And so if they need therapy, they must have something that they're like almost they were bad at,
Responsible
when
for, but yeah, yeah,
right, when in a sense it's really, it's the fault of the trauma, it's the fault of the grief, it's the fault of, it's right, it's not even a fault, to be
yeah.
honest. It's just part of being human.
Right. Well, and one thing I was just going to say too, and you probably had this experience, and maybe this might sound foreign to people that haven't, but like in the training we did with the MDR, they had us practice it, and then we had it practice on us. So I definitely now have had
Right.
experience
Yeah.
in MDR full firsthand.
Yeah.
And I
Cool.
thought that the one thing that was super interesting about it was when I was taken back to this memory I was working on, was I had no idea that I'd process it the way I did. Like it just, I was like, what? Like, why did
Right.
that come out of it? And because I always thought it was just more, okay, this is the trauma, or this is what it is. It's pretty basic. But the fact that I had thought about it in the way that I did, or I had, internalized the way I did,
Right.
just totally caught me off guard. But then you look at your life and then you make sense of maybe some of the things where you've been stuck or maybe had issues, then it's like it all kind of comes together. It's like, oh, that's like
That's the best
super.
when
You're like, oh
right when it
man,
starts to make
that's
sense.
amazing.
It's like
Yeah,
it's the most liberating feeling, right? And
yeah.
it is. Sorry, I just have a
No, you're
grumpy
good.
toddler, and I'm just gonna go granola bar
Right.
at him.
No,
When it
I
when it
mean,
starts to make sense, and you start to have reasons, and then you're like, okay, it's not just me. It's not just my own like failings. It's
right.
it's the fact that I'm a human and reasons and this I can handle. Like this I can work with.
Yeah. Yeah, and I definitely think that that's the whole thing too. One of the statements I read in the EMDR book was just like, it's never too late. There's always room for that healing and for that ability to kind of reprocess. And so whatever point we're at, even if we feel like, the trauma's 20 years behind us or whatever it is, if we've never done the work on it, it's never too late. Like we can do that now. We can give ourselves the next 20 years of freedom rather than just thinking like, okay, well, we're fine or whatever it might be,
Exactly.
or we don't need to do that, you know. Um,
Yeah. You give it to yourselves and you give it to your family too.
yeah,
Like the things that our vulnerabilities is what I had been projecting on others as well, right?
yeah,
Like when once I had become aware of the things that I was personally struggling with, then I could see how I was projecting certain things and relationships about me, and then it starts to be like, oh, and I can see how maybe this person, how that wasn't about me, how that was more about them even as well, and you can kind of start to just love and accept and understand both sides and like the whole family. Like I love there was just a phrase of basically like a healed person like just blesses like however many people, because one healed person in a family, it just like spreads.
yeah, yeah.
So
Yeah. Well, I think that people start to notice the difference and they start to see it, and you wear it differently and you're able to also, I mean, it's also too in the way you talk, right? It's in the way that you're able to communicate things and share things. Like you said, it's infectious. So one thing I just kind of want to put out there and kind of get in and sort of more of a closing thing. I really loved what you said in your Facebook post. I know I keep referring to this, but it's at the end of your statement. You said, all I can do is as much as I can on my own and just hope and pray the rest comes together. Don't be afraid. A little self-awareness goes a long way. We all have vulnerabilities. Being aware of them just equips us to stop them from further damage, or further damaging our chances at peace and loving, healthy relationship. Who couldn't use a little healing? We can't be dependent on anyone else to do it for us. So, any thoughts about that? I know you wrote that or you said that, so I just thought that was an amazing statement. And I don't know, any kind of final words that you have kind of with that, or that you would share with anybody that's listening or that maybe is on the fence about healing?
right, yeah, it and that is if you can just like adjust the way of thinking and see the therapy as a privilege and basically a gift to yourself and to your own sense of peace, and it really is a blessing and definitely nothing to be ashamed of. And I got about 50 messages after that post from people who were just like, I'm gonna think of, I doubt all 50 went for it, but like just thanking me for it. And like there's just way more people that want therapy than even don't, and
Yeah,
like they're for some reason we're just the same. We're all just the same humans with the same struggle, and there's nothing different or broken about. And I mean, broken could be a word. I've definitely felt broken, but that doesn't mean that yeah, it's not that it's a shameful thing to try to like to heal it. It's not that you need fixed, but healing
right.
is
Yeah.
almost a better term.
Yeah, the word broken and stuff definitely implies more of a negative connotation, but it's like we all have stuff, we all have different things that, we've gone through, and part of
Yep.
it makes us who we are, but then also part of it, limits us in our ability to whether it's fully love, fully be
Right.
present in our lives.
Yeah.
And so
Don't
like
let
I
the
said,
trauma take more than it needs to.
yeah, yeah,
And that's how I feel the
yeah.
grief. Yep.
So just like you said, being able to give a gift to ourselves so that we can appreciate our lives to the fullest and just kind of be
Yeah.
present in them and engage in a way that, I mean, because it sucks walking around being triggered all the time and just kind of having
Yep.
everything kind of
Exhausting. Yeah.
right.
Exhausting.
Yeah.
I'm so thankful to be at this end of things for sure.
Right, right.
But it's been months and months. Like I started therapy a year and a bit ago, so
Yeah,
it's been
not
work. Yeah,
yeah, definitely not an easy quick fix or whatever, but it's definitely but but along the way and kind of as you're in it, you definitely get those moments like you said where it just things
right.
come together and then you
Start
start
connecting dots.
yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. So, all right, well, I really appreciate you coming on, Pam, and sharing your story and talking about healing and kind of getting through our losses. And I think your story is awesome and not awesome, in that sense, or whatever, but that you're, you
I
know.
get it. Thank you.
So anyway, I hope people will take a listen and if they, are in that place, like you said, as far as just maybe on the fence of getting help, that they take the leap because it's definitely worth it. So.
And it goes a long way every time just to have people have good feedback to when I share too. Like it's so healing in return for me. So I appreciate it. It's been like it was nerve wracking for me, but this is definitely even this podcast will just another step in the
Yep,
healing.
that's right. Yeah. All right. Well, thank you again.
Yep. You're welcome.